People aren't always choosing to drive just because the train isn't on time. A lot of people are choosing to drive because they don't live in a place that has transit. And I think for a lot of people, you're seeing people are moving further and further from the inner core because no one can afford to live in the inner core. You know, when you look at MassDOT employees, the majority of us live on commuter rail lines because we're state employees. We can't afford to pay $500,000, and that's if you could get a discount home in the inner core. The traffic is going to continue from further out in until we have more transit options.
As someone who hosts a morning news show, waking up before 3 a.m. every day and trying to go to sleep at 7, so it is almost my bedtime, I know how important every second of our day is. And as a regular rider of the T, I know how frustrating it can be to lose that time to a train or a bus. The question that we're exploring tonight, can we trust the T, cuts to the very core of Boston's future. Hundreds of thousands of people use the MBTA every day to get to work in medicine, biotech, to get to school, to work as first responders, essential city workers. And while it might feel like the T is one thing, a monolith, a train that never arrives, or a bus that comes late, and somehow the exact same bus is right behind it, it's a collection of people, the people who run the agency, but also the people who rely on it. I spent the past couple years at GBH regularly talking to riders in my free time, hearing what frustrates them, why they need the T to live their lives and get to work, what they love about the T also, like new ferry service and fresh new trains or increased transparency, and also what frustrates them. So tonight, before we begin this rockstar panel discussion with the leaders and advocates shaping transportation policy in Massachusetts, I thought it would be worthwhile to hear from you, from the people who use the T every day. Thank you so much to the entire GBH Forum Network team for producing this event and the video that you're about to be seeing. And without further ado, as I toss things over to your host for this evening, our transportation reporter, Bob Seay, we're going to hear from the biggest names in Boston Transit tonight. But first, to tee up this conversation, we are going to take a ride on the T. The MBTA is going through a bit of a rough patch, but the people in charge of it want to fix it. So today, we're going to head to some train stations and hear what you think. Do you think they're getting the job done? And do you trust the T? Do you trust the T?
Somewhat. Commuter rail, trust it explicitly. The subway has been a little bit erratic.
I trust it as much as any public transit system, given the circumstances.
Trust is maybe not the word I would use.
Sometimes, not really. I don't know. Usually stuff's broken down.
No, I don't.
Not entirely. Not entirely.
It gets me to point A to point B, but it could be very much improved.
Yes.
What makes you trust it?
All you ever hear is that it breaks down, but out of the thousands of trips, most of the time it's still there.
Yes, at least in the sense I trust the operators to operate safely, if not always on time.
Do you feel like you're confident you're going to fit on your next train here?
We're gonna find out, aren't we?
Do you think you're going to make it onto the next train that all of you are going to be able to fit?
I don't think so. Yesterday I waited like another train, and then I got the third one.
That's 3 trains. Do you think that you're going to fit on this next train? Do you think there's going to be room for you?
100%.
10 years ago, I think every 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes was pretty standard, but now I feel waiting a lot longer.
The service has been terrible. Bowdoin Street is terrible. I don't know if you've been to that stop. There's no elevator, and the escalators have been broken for well over a year. It just seems to be very neglected.
I bet a lot of people I know would complain about cleanliness, but I wouldn't. I'm fine with it.
Definitely can go faster, and obviously crowd control. Sometimes it gets way too hot, way too crowded.
Every day getting late for the office, so that is causing issue.
Yeah, so you're late to work because of the T?
Of course.
What do you think would make it better?
I don't know, a new administration or a fresh outlook on it, maybe a different turn on what they've been doing, because what they've been doing hasn't been working. They're living in the problem, not the solution.
More accountability, I think. I think that we deserve a little bit more of a play-by-play of what actually goes on. You know, I know that obviously a lot of this comes down to who they hire in terms of project management, and I think that there should be more visibility for step-by-step plans for timelines to hold things accountable.
More trains.
More trains. Yeah, I think a lot is put into sometimes stations, which are great. You know, we all don't want to like watch rats crawl by us with trash, but I think having more trains more frequently would be a lot better.
I hope, you know, I hope it's a safer environment for especially women. My friends have told me some pretty rough stories.
It'd be very interesting to like have more active and transparent like community participation budgeting. This is something I think it would be good for the city overall, but it might be a good place to start with the T.
More consistent service, take it back to where it was, like this train that's coming in here now. So I'm going to jump on that in a second.
I think this train's closed today, actually. You can go check, but I think Forest Hills is not running the orange line today. You have to get alternate service on the green line here.
The next train to Riverside arrives in 2 minutes.
I don't know. I think it's a larger systemic issue. I think it has to go with allocation of funding, and then maybe there's certain people who get kickbacks for things as well. I think it's very political. I don't think there's a single issue. There's a single thing that could change it.
Just make the tea better, faster, on time.
Yeah.
That's it.
Hire new people. Hire people that will get things done right and fast.
Get it together. Yeah, get it together.
Let's just get this thing fixed and get it back to where it was. It was okay in the past, and let's just see if, as fast as we can get there. These service outages randomly, it's just kind of annoying.
Attention Green Line passengers, trains are experiencing 15-minute delays due to a disabled train at Park Street.
Would you come up? Well, thank you all for being here tonight, and especially our guests who are indeed the core of the transportation power structure here in Boston, and we really appreciate them being here to talk about an issue, as Jeremy mentioned, that affects everyone. I just have a few introductory remarks, and then we'll get into some of the questions. But as we saw in that clip, people are still not quite sure what is going on with the T. They're hopeful, but having been misled so many times in the past, most riders, in fact, have trouble trusting the T. Trust it to get them where they have to go on time and safely. I'm told there was a time when the T did work and worked well. Tom Glynn, who is now chair of the T board, said it did when he was the manager 35 years ago. But since then, the T has been on a serious downward slide, as we all know. Starved for cash by skeptical politicians who preached reform before revenue, the aging equipment and the infrastructure just continued to deteriorate, reaching a climax in February of 2015. You remember Snowmageddon, when a series of snowstorms brought the T and the city to its knees. The general manager then was Beverly Scott, who just before resigning following those snowstorms appeared at what was a very memorable press conference.
We are running an extremely aged system that is getting a pounding every single day, and we love it because we love our public. But I'm telling you that this is not a spring chicken system by any stretch of the imagination. And if anyone, and we have more intelligent people per mile in these communities than you can shake a stick at, for anyone to have any belief that a system that's over 100 years old, that's got equipment, much of it that is running out there on this red and this orange lines that are at much over capacity, can continue with the age that it is, and to think that it's going to have the resilience to wind up rebounding and flying like an eagle, that is absolutely the epitome of, and I'm not going to say foolish.
And those of us who were here remember that news conference very well, because Beverly was indeed speaking the truth. And she might not be as calm and even keel as our current general manager, but she was feeling the frustration that everybody was feeling.
Bless you.
Her message, Boston, get real, and that was 10 years ago in 2015. So where have we come since then? And what do we have to do to regain the public's trust? Something that you, Phil Eng, have said is the most important goal you have, is rebuilding the public's trust. I remember you, and that's what really gave me the idea for this theme. So what is your reaction to what you heard Beverly say? And in your opinion, how far are we coming, or how far have we gone to getting to that trust level?
Well, one of the things that I think Beverly was talking about, and the one thing that I've felt with all my dealings with the public, is it's about communication. And regardless of where we are in terms of the system, our infrastructure needs, and the service, being upfront with the public is part of rebuilding that trust and keeping that trust. A lot of the infrastructure that I've talked about over the last year needs significant investment. I'm pleased that we are making that investment. The governor, the administration, and the legislature have given us the dollars to be able to start rebuilding our infrastructure and our workforce. Both of those are instrumental to being able to start to bring back the reliable service that they need. Communication is on us to be able to ensure that we are being very transparent with the needs, as well as the service that they can expect. But we are making headway that we're going to build upon moving forward. The ability to bring in over 1,200 employees last year, exceeding the governor's goal of 1,000, has allowed us to start getting our operators levels back to where we need to. We still have more to do, but huge difference. The workforce that needs to be doing the maintenance and repairing, whether it's the track, the power system, our signal system and stations, or even the rolling stock, all of that is huge to us being able to continue going in the right direction. And then the new leadership team that is in place, that's focused on training, focused on making some tough decisions, but the right decisions. And we're seeing it now. The trains are starting to run more reliable. We're running the Green Line. 96% of the Green Line now is restriction-free. We have a Blue Line diversion coming up. And after that Blue Line diversion is done, we will be completely restriction-free across the whole Blue Line end-to-end. And those are the signs that we are taking this in the right direction. And when that starts to materialize, the trains will run more closer to schedule. More operators, more trains means we can have more trains running. And then we will start to bring down the time between trains as well. People will see more reliable service, more frequent service. That will start to help start to rebuild trust. And we know we have to earn trust every day. It's crucial that we focus on each component step by step, but I believe we're making headway.
I've always wanted to ask you, were there some mornings you woke up and wondered how you got yourself into this situation?
You know, I wanted to come. When you see the needs, and one of the reasons that so many folks are here tonight, and when we don't do what we say we're going to do, that's why people get frustrated. We make an impact on people's lives, and what we're trying to do is make a positive impact on people's lives, and I know we can. We're just going to continue to demonstrate day in and day out our commitment, and it really is because of the workforce. You should see some of the folks that we brought on board and the folks that are still there. They truly are committed. They just needed the support that we're starting to see now, and to be able to give them the tools and the direction that they've been waiting for. And basically, it's go, go, go.
And Secretary Tibbits-Nutt, you were here when Beverly Scott.
Been here a long time.
And you were appointed to the Fiscal Management and Control Board created by Governor Baker to rescue the Chi. So from your perspective, where have we come since then?
Well, we didn't rescue it. I think we really started the transparency back then. I think anyone that was here in 2015, the MBTA was kind of a mystery and how it worked. And I've been working on and around the T for a very long time. We really kind of laid it bare and I think had the really difficult discussions that we needed to have. And a lot of it really was around a lack of funding, inconsistent leadership, constant turnover in leadership, and this is kind of what happens. And I think that's where the public were really just kind of like, what are you all doing? Because it wasn't any one individual that was the problem. It was just a series of too many people doing too many things at the same time. And you know how it is here. Every time an administration changes, you got to replace everybody. You got to get new GM, new secretary, new board, all of this. And it makes it very difficult for anyone to stay long enough to actually be able to deliver on the job. Do I think we did everything that we wanted to do? No. I think the pandemic really cut that time short. But I think we started the conversation that needed to be had, and I think especially about the fiscal cliff. We started to just say, listen, you can't expect a better system if you don't pay for it, and really started to work on getting rid of that reform before revenue.
Mm-hmm. Of course, part of the idea of having an authority is to insulate it somewhat, and that has not seemed to happen with the MBTA.
No.
Is there any hope that that will happen, that you'll be able to function without, the political oversight that can be a problem?
I mean, I think quite honestly, that would be a question for the legislature. This is many years in the making. I think the big thing now is that, as the general manager said, we have an unbelievable leadership team. And so even though we are still connected, I think allowing them to do their jobs, and I think the board is doing that, is just allowing them to do what they need to do and really serving more in a support role. My job is just to try and get money for the T from the legislature and the Commonwealth. Like, that is my job. And for the board, it's just, once again, trying to support me to try and get the money. But we have a leadership team that we can trust in. But any idea of any major governance structure change, I don't think the legislature is going to do that anytime in the near future.
Jared Johnson of Transit Matters, really one of the most effective advocacy groups we have among many here in Boston. You do an incredible job monitoring the T's performance. So what is your perspective on where we've been since you've been involved with Transit Matters 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of changes, and I think it does feel like we are definitely finally on a good track, if you'll excuse the pun. I think the statements that you heard in that video are that it takes a long time to rebuild trust, and I think that if you are on a line that really hasn't seen that much of a change in the slow zone, then it doesn't really matter that the slow zones on the red line have been cut in half, or if you're on a section of the red line where there's still those slow zones, then some of that progress doesn't matter. So I think it will take a while for the perception to catch up with reality. But I do think we're moving in the right direction, and I think the Secretary is right in that the FMCB, the Fiscal Management Control Board, was a sea change, and I think so much of the work that we did would not have been possible if the board was business as usual. I think I talk a lot about how the Secretary and I, when she was Vice Chair, we didn't always see eye to eye, but I knew that when we went to those meetings, we had somebody that was listening, and I think that's the most important thing. And I think that from top down, I think we're in a much better place, whether it is the leadership team and the general manager here taking a different look at how we do track maintenance and really accelerating that, as well as the leadership team, the Secretary's office. I think it's and the new board. I think we're moving in the right direction, and we've seen. I think we're seeing the potential for sure.
Just about a month before you arrived, Phil, there was a system-wide slowdown. And what we all realized was that the T didn't really understand just how broken it was. That there were a lot of things that were wrong, that despite surveys and inspections, they were not adequately addressed or all even known. And you step in 1 month after that to this situation. And you have gone forward with a track improvement program, which some people they have their heads spinning by trying to keep track of what line, what work is being done on what line. It's been disruptive and confusing for so many riders who've had to deal with those service suspensions and diversions onto shuttle buses. But as you indicated before, you do feel that progress is being made, but is it 2 steps ahead or 1 or 2 back? Or because some people say, well, we see some restrictions removed, but others crop up. that's the perception. What is the cause of that, do you think?
Well, it is more than 2 steps forward now and 1 step back. Early on when we first started, when I first got here, we were seeing the back and forth. We would do enough work to lift restrictions, but we would only have enough time to get in and take care of the restriction itself. And that was doing work on the overnights, the limited hours that we had, or weekends. What we're doing here is much more robust in terms of these diversions. And I understand the need for and the impacts of people's trips because it forces alternative service during those windows. But what we committed to is not only addressing the speed restrictions, is now we're taking it and we're repairing the conditions adjacent to those restrictions that if left unattended for a period of time would become restrictions. And that was the 2 steps forward, 2 steps backwards, or 1 step backwards. And then now, when we have the system running where we've started to tackle the long-term needs, or those needs have been left unattended, if something arises, and we know they will, we can get in though and take care of it. When we are taking a much more proactive approach to repairing the areas that have been left unattended for a while, we can now do proper maintenance. We can go in and do timely corrective repairs. And the public will see that going forward. I think not long ago we had something come back up on the Green Line. The team went back in and they eliminated it. And that's what's going to happen. Now, at the end of this year, when we finish restoring all of our track back to line speed, maximum speed allowable, what we look to do then next is to develop a track renewal program. So then we can start the program year after year. How much do we need to invest and actually now go back and replace track fully? What we're doing now is a really good repair to be able to maintain the system. But then we'll develop a program where we can systematically start to tackle not only that, but then the power systems. We're continuing to replace rolling stock. All these different components that are going to be integral to your day-to-day trip, not only reliable, safe, but more frequent. And those are the building blocks of the future. The workforce is really embracing it, and I'm really excited about the future.
I know the power and the signal problems have been significant. Jared, your organization's been monitoring the performance of the T. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the travel times decrease, which is what we want to see. And I think sometimes there is a little confusion because you will see sometimes that there might be more speed restrictions added onto a line. But that's why for our data dashboard and our different trackers, we don't track the number of speed restrictions. We track the travel time because there could be a circumstance. This is the exact sort of scenario, but you could imagine there's a really severe track condition on there's a really severe track restriction, and they fix an element of it, but there might still be some sections they have to go back to on either side of that, and so then you've taken 1 speed restriction and there's 2, but we're still seeing that once that most severe speed restriction has been lifted, that they're able to run the trains faster, even if they do have to come back and do some of that other work. So I think that is some of the confusion that is happening, but overall we are seeing that the service is getting better. I think the next sort of thing to tackle, and I think it's related to the speed restrictions, is the time between trains, and so that is partially a function of if the trains are taking longer because of those speed restrictions, that has an impact on the headway, or again that time between trains. But overall, we are seeing the team move in a better direction.
In the video, we saw some people saying there aren't enough trains. The trains are too crowded. What about that, Phil?
Well, we are focused on maintaining the rolling stock, the trains. The key other part is the operators, and we've been hiring operators because what we need is both the operators to run the trains and more fleet. The Orange Line, we're continuing to get new fleet. I believe we're at 118 cars right now. When I first started a year ago, the headway on the Orange Line, I think, was about 11, 12 minutes between trains. I remember commuting in from Forest Hills. But over the period of time, we've been able to add consist after consist as we got more rolling stock and as we had more operators, to where now we're running 14 train consists a day, I believe is the number. We're hoping to get the 15th in soon. And that has, even without all the restrictions being removed in terms of the track work, that has enabled us to get the Orange Line trains to running about 7 minutes, 8 minutes between trains. We will get that down. And when we eliminate these restrictions, you will see that we can run the schedules more consistently. So with the operators that are being hired, with the trains that we continue to get, those headways will drop. When the Blue Line is done after the next, I think, 12 days we have coming up, we expect that the headways will definitely always be under 5 minutes during the peak hours, which is really a good, robust time. We will do better as we bring on more staff. But that's where we need to get to, where the public can at least appreciate that the frequency that we're running will be running on a regular basis. And they don't have that yet, but we will get there. And then they can plan their day around that. But the future is going to be get enough operators, get enough rolling stock to have those headways even better. And that's not just during the peak hours. I think it's important that we need to take a look at the off-peak hours, because that's where a lot of potential for growth is. The pandemic has changed travel patterns. It's not just going to and from work. It's how do we reinvent our services to be able to provide the ability for people to use mass transportation for everything else that the Commonwealth has to offer. Because just this whole marathon weekend, we were chatting earlier, the amount of folks using the system, and knock on wood, we did what we promised. That's what we thrive on those challenges. But the ability to move people around so they can enjoy everything that was going on this weekend was fantastic. And that was from countries across the globe, 50 states across the nation. So we did Boston proud this thing.
Sometimes it seems like you're rebuilding the entire system. It's close to it.
Well, we are. We are taking it step by step, and that's why we've kind of gone back to basics. From the folks that we have working at the T and the new hires, we're redoing training programs. We're taking a look at our procedures and processes, and we're taking best practices, and we hope to have some of our own. But then also the infrastructure. How do we invest the dollars? Because we know how precious taxpayer dollars are, and we need to demonstrate that we can spend those dollars wisely, not only on maintenance and service, but then delivering projects that are going to build a system that everyone could be proud of in the future. We are all striving towards that world-class system that people can be proud of.
And Secretary Tibbits-Nutt, is there enough money to do all these repairs?
That's the question I get? Okay.
Well, you said you're the one responsible.
I told Bob to give that one to you.
Clearly. Not yet.
Not yet.
It's just not yet. I mean, this is why the governor put forward that executive order for the task force. We don't have enough money. And with revenues at the Commonwealth are also going down. We are in a crisis, and I think this is a crisis that the T hasn't been in before. I was talking to the general manager earlier today. I mean, 15 years ago, we were talking about a crisis of $70 million deficit. I would dream for a $70 million deficit. Now we're adding a zero to that. We have to come up with more revenue options. There are only so many levers the T has. You can't raise fares high enough to close that gap. You can't cut service enough to close that gap. That's it. That's all they have. So it really is on us, whether we're looking at tolling, whether you're looking at congestion pricing, whether we're looking at payroll taxes. We have to look at everything. Mm-hmm. And we have until the end of this year to deliver that to the governor, every possible option. But as you know, these are the things we've talked about for a very long time. But you throw it out, everyone loses their mind, and then you back away from it. But this time we're putting it out there and saying, this is how much money you could raise from this particular item. And then it really is up to the legislature, up to elected officials to do something. The T can't fix this. And the federal government is not going to step in and fix it. So it really is on us as a Commonwealth to find a way to generate the revenue they need to move even beyond all the amazing work the general manager is doing and take it to that world-class system.
You know, ridership is still around 50% or below in some cases, except for commuter rail. But I was reading about the Washington system, you know, and how they kind of brought themselves back. And it was by investing in a lot more frequency, a lot more trains, and that, you know, inducing people to take the system. But we don't seem to be in that situation, Phil. What is the problem? What are the challenges of bringing riders back to the system?
Well, I think part of the heading of the program is, can you trust the T? People want to trust the T. People need to trust the T. And that's where we have to get the system back to where it's more reliable and make people feel that it's safe. And we're not going to run service if it's not safe, but the reliability of it. And that gets back to the earlier thing of what is our schedule? Can we adhere to the schedule? But then it also has to do with the frequency, because I also know if it's not frequent enough, people will opt to go a different route. If it doesn't, it could get you in, but it can't get you home, people will choose different ways. So really, the commuter rail, Bob, you talked about it, that's a perfect example that we have started to not only have on-time performance in the low 90s, 93, 94% on a regular basis, but the frequency of the commuter rail is making a difference too. And whether it's the frequency day to day, but also the frequency and schedules when we had special events, and I talked about this at some of the previous public meetings and board meetings, haunted happenings in Salem. This year, when we had schedules and people could choose their train schedules, we had even greater ridership for that function and event that people want to go to. And that's where we need to get to, where people can rely on it, but also people know that it's frequent enough that you could just go to the station and you not have to worry about it. If you miss it, then you're sitting there and waiting for a long period of time. We will get that with the buses. We will get that back with the subways and every other system that we're doing. It's just a matter of us fixing our infrastructure first, because there are impediments to the track issues and speed restrictions and all those things. When we start tackling that, we'll be able to start running more frequent service, and then it's building for the future.
Is that why commuter rail is more successful, because the infrastructure is more intact and functional?
I think it's just because we've been able to provide that more frequent service, more reliable service up front. The subway system is one where, and this is not just here, I think a lot of the areas where we needed to do more work, maybe there was a hesitancy not to take tracks out of service through that work. It's always this thing where I need to keep running service, and what happens? It's the maintenance that doesn't get done as timely as it should be. And next thing you know, it's beyond maintenance, and the corrective repairs are, in this case, I guess we started to slow things down versus actually getting in there and fixing it. Mm-hmm. This year is not something I wanted to do as far as these diversions, but it's actually something we needed to do, because if we didn't do these diversions, we would probably have speed restrictions for years to come. And this way, we're going to get rid of them. I'd love to get rid of the speed restriction dashboard. And that doesn't mean we won't report on them if they pop up, but that's my goal.
Traffic. The traffic in and around Boston seems worse than ever. And of course, not having a functioning T isn't helping. Many would be riders, find the T too unreliable and take their car instead. And some of it is the coordination of schedules, like people who are trying to get to a commuter train, but the red line isn't working. And they experience that a couple of times, and they basically give up, and they're in their car. I do have some, doubt that the T can solve all of the traffic problems, because there always seems to be more traffic there to fill. But ridership is recovering, but it has plateaued. Phil, you seem to think it will come back once you can build that reliability. But Monica, this is kind of a question for you. Is there a greater plan, as you're the Secretary of Transportation, to deal with all this traffic?
Yeah, there has to be. I think the thing that people don't talk about is people aren't always choosing to drive just because the train isn't on time. A lot of people are choosing to drive because they don't live in a place that has transit. And I think for a lot of people, you're seeing people are moving further and further from the inner core because no one can afford to live in the inner core. When you look at MassDOT employees, the majority of us live on commuter rail lines because we're state employees. We can't afford to pay $500,000, and that's if you could get a discount home in the inner core. The traffic is going to continue from further out in until we have more transit options. And the commuter rail is a wonderful example. The commuter rail is awesome. And a lot of people live near the commuter rail stations, but if you live out in Zone 8, it's $400 a month. that is outside of the reach for many, many people. And I think until we can bring down the cost of transit, especially in the outer lying communities, we're not going to be able to get people out of their cars. And I think it also goes to, it's 177 communities served by the MBTA. We have 351 municipalities. A lot of the municipalities where you have people driving in from there, they're regional transit authorities, which is why when I talk about transit and transportation, it's the entire ecosystem. Very few people are only using one mode. Until we can fix housing, I can't fix congestion. And no one likes to hear that. And this is something, transportation has a housing problem. And it really is. We bring down the cost of housing. I can get people closer in and get them off the road for these entire journeys. If I can get enough funding for the T and I can bring down the cost of the commuter rail, you will see thousands and thousands of people getting out of their cars. If you cannot address those two things, it's going to be very difficult for me to ease the congestion unless everyone is going to stay home. And the people who need to drive in these hours, they have to go to work in person. This is a massive equity issue.
When everybody started working from home during the pandemic, it was thought, well, they're going to stay there. The traffic won't be as bad. But there's still lots of people on the road driving around. Jared, what are your thoughts about the housing transportation?
Absolutely.
Connection?
I mean, something I wanted to note when we talked about DC and some of their recovery, I think that yes, the frequency is a large part of it, but also if DC were a state, it would lead the East Coast in housing units per capita, and a lot of that housing construction happened when WMATA, when the Metro was in the depths of its issues, and so Secretary is absolutely right. Housing is a really, really, really critical part of this, and I think that we are not likely to see the same share of people working in downtown Boston. We're just not. Offices have moved, people have moved, people have changed their work patterns, and so how we are going to get back to that ridership level is going to be more housing, and it's going to be more housing, in all areas of the greater Boston region, and it's going to be housing at all levels, and it needs to happen quickly. But housing is a really, really critical part, and I think it's a twofold thing because it is putting more people within what we call the walk shed, or with connecting buses and RTA service, the transit shed, the folks who live, who can get to that service. But it's also that if we are creative about it, and if we have cities and towns thinking differently about parking and requiring 2 parking spots for every single unit, we can then have some of that money instead of going into parking spots that are, $10,000, $12,000 for a piece of asphalt, all the way up to $100,000 for structured parking. That's money that can go into the T and into making the T better, into making stations accessible, all of those things. So housing really is a really critical part, and we just can't allow politicians or cities and towns to say, well, it's okay, we're not going to build the housing until the transit gets better. No, the transit is the way it is because so much of the growth has happened outside of the reach of the T. It's happened off of interstates. It's happened, the side of office parks, because that's where folks wanted to do it, not next to the train stations that the Commonwealth pays a bunch of money for. There are cities and towns who just take those properties that could be that are well within the walk shade of transit. Those are the places where they're least likely to build housing.
We haven't talked about buses and how they can help, or how improving the system can help. I know the MBTA is involved in a bus network redesign for some years now. It's a tough one, trying to get bus lanes to facilitate bus travel when you talk about asphalt and who's occupying it. What about that, Secretary Tibbits-Nutt, the bus system? How can that help?
I love the bus system. You know this about me. I love buses. Buses are amazing. They are so flexible. You can move them based on where people are living. They're wonderful. The biggest issue the T has with their bus system is traffic. And bus lanes, people have to get out of the bus lanes. You have to stop parking in the bus lanes. You have to stop driving in the bus lanes. And that is a transportation enforcement issue. That's not on the T. And that's why we're pushing forward with legislation start ticketing people on that. Buses are the best hope we have for serving communities quickly. And it's also much cheaper, at least in the land of transit, much cheaper than any other option. And as Jared's talking about, especially with the MBTA Communities Act, being able to make it to where developers can build housing cheaper, buses are going to be able to serve that in a way that rail can't. Because the days of these massive rail projects, and correct me, General Manager, we're not going to see that anytime in the near future, completely new lines. Buses really are the best option, and if you can get them out of traffic, it's better than the subway.
Money is the big issue that we're talking about as well. We all know it's going to take billions and billions of dollars. You're on a task force that's going to come up with some funding solutions. But realistically, you're probably not going to get the money you really need, because this has to go through the legislature. Is there a plan B, or are there contingency plans for not getting the money? In other words, are there priorities that you have that you want to fund and others that you realize you might have to relinquish?
There isn't a plan B. I think for having a plan B and prioritizing it, we're going to do the exact same thing we've always done, where we just start cutting services. And we're going to cut services to the communities that need it the most. This is an equity issue. It really, really is. And this is what has been going on for 50 years. We pick winners and losers when you can't pay the bills. And we can't do that. I mean, beyond the fact it is just wrong, you are never going to be able to build back the economy of the Commonwealth, and you're not going to be able to keep residents. Young people are leaving Massachusetts. This is why. Because they have nowhere to live, and they don't have service to the places that they can't afford to. There isn't a plan B, but we don't have a choice. We have to find a way to do this.
And Phil Eng, so far the legislature has been pretty good to the MBTA, but you're aware of the real needs ahead, and what will you do if the money just isn't there?
Well, my priority is to take whatever funds are available, and then, as the Secretary said, prioritize the needs of the existing infrastructure. As we continue to make those improvements, we will be able to find ways to be more efficient. The goal is not to cut service. The goal is not to do anything that actually would send us in the wrong direction. And we've seen where that took us, and we don't want to be back there again. My need right now is to continue to demonstrate that we will provide the best service we can, reliable service that we can, and that we are a good investment. Because when you invest in mass transportation or in transportation as a whole, the economy will thrive, the businesses will thrive, and quality of life will thrive. And Secretary is right, Jared's right. We are trying to create an environment where people can afford to live and want to live and work in Massachusetts. The ability to develop housing, affordable housing around stations and a little more dense than single-family homes of that nature is going to be a big part of it, because then mass transportation will become the normal mode of travel for the folks that choose to live in those types of developments. That doesn't mean the cars will be eradicated, because we know that you have to have both. You have to have a balanced transportation system. And that's really the key, is to continue to make sure that we invest in our infrastructure, and then find ways to actually still think about building for the future, because we want to be where some of those riders were talking about, the trains being crowded. We want it to be because so many people have come back to the system, because it's as reliable as it should be, and as robust as it should be. That would be the fun challenge. That was pre-pandemic challenges at a lot of places, and we would welcome that back.
Jared, your organization has rightly advocated for some really aspirational things: higher frequency regional rail service, electrification of trains and buses. But realistically, how can these be financed, or will money be the stumbling block?
Yeah, I think it's a yes and. So I think that, first of all, a lot of the stuff that we talk about is not, we don't think of regional rail as some, extra expansion, this extra sort of thing that we have a luxury of choosing, we either do it or we won't. Half of the T's locomotives they either won't work, or they will have to undergo significant long-term maintenance at the end of the decade. So we think about this as really a state of good repair need as well, right? We have stations that, hundreds, if not thousands of folks with disabilities or mobility challenges can't access that train station. So we don't see it as this sort of extra thing. And when we, as the secretary talked about, we're not going to solve our congestion issues. We're not going to solve our affordable housing issues if we don't think differently about our commuter rail system, right? I mean, that is, we often talk about how we need to get rid of commuter rail because commuting is not the same. We need a rail system that can be used for doctors' office visits, to go visit friends and family, for whatever it is that people need. So again, that's how we're couching it. And even some of our bolder, more visionary plans, if we get back to the place that the general manager is talking about, 2019, there were folks who on the Orange Line, they needed to go. If they were trying to get on in and around Sullivan, they needed to go northbound to then get off at Wellington or Malden somewhere and then go back down. And so, we do need to think about what are the ways that whether it's bus lanes or polite disagreement. I think we should new rail lines or extensions or whatever. Those aren't going to happen for some time, but those things take 10, 15 years to plan, and so we should be thinking about them, and that should be a part of the conversation for the money. Because yes, I think the money is going to be a major stumbling block for that, but I think that if we build the vision and we talk about that the only way that we're going to meet some of the challenges we have, climate change, housing, socioeconomic equity, continuing to be a competitive region, that better public transportation is a critical part of that. I think that's how we build the will for that funding.
I'd like to talk a little bit about major capital projects the MBTA gets involved in. Oversight, for instance, 3 projects that come to mind: the Green Line extension, where we found out after the fact, and unfortunately you did, that the construction was not up to par. The troublesome contract with CRRC for the orange and red line cars, where we find ourselves with very few alternatives but to accept what we have to. And South Coast Rail. I was at the meeting in Fall River last week where residents were very disappointed because they had been told when it was going to start and how much it was going to cost. And they were told that night, we don't know when it's going to start, and we don't know how much it's going to cost. And this goes right to the issue of trust and credibility. What about the management and oversight of those big capital projects, Phil?
Well, that's one of the areas that is really near and dear to my heart, because I talked about needing to ensure that we take the taxpayer dollars and spend it wisely. This is something that, with regards to how we manage all capital projects, whether it's large or small, it's about ownership and accountability of the MBTA leads, but also working with our partners in terms of whether it's the engineering firms that are doing design, the contracting industry that's delivering the projects, and it's the spirit of the transparent dialogue that needs to take place between all of the parties working towards a common goal. And I think some of the examples you talk about, let's just use Green Line extension. Issues are not uncommon on these projects. It's just a matter, though, of being upfront about the issues and tackling them at the right time. And again, I don't know all the reasons behind the decisions made there, but I do believe that those decisions should have been done long before I got to the T. And we could have avoided a lot of the issues that we had to go back and fix. And that has to do with every project. If you bring them up, and people don't like to share bad news, but it doesn't have to be bad news. It can just be, hey, there's a challenge I'm working on. We have a solution, we believe, but we just need everyone to be aware of. And if you elevate those issues up, then you can start to say, how do we solve those problems and solve them together? It doesn't have to be finger pointing, it doesn't have to be blaming one another, because at the end of the day, we serve the public, and it doesn't matter if someone else is at fault or I'm at fault. We have to all be accountable for what we do. And it really is a culture shift that we are working on in terms of how we want to manage, because we want everyone to manage it as if those dollars are coming out of our own pocket, because they are. We're all taxpayers, and we need to manage those projects. And that's our commitment moving forward. We are going through the whole capital investment plan, and we are going to have meetings with every manager on every project to discuss where we are, what's the schedule, what's the budget, and how we're doing. And if it's okay to tell me we need to course correct, but let me know so we can help and do that. We have a lot of new leaders. We have a lot of folks that are invested. And all we're trying to do is make sure everyone knows that we're in this together, and don't be afraid to raise those issues earlier.
I just have one more question before we get some comments from the public, and that's about the future. A former colleague of yours on the MFCB once told me, it's somewhat sobering to realize that once we spend the billions of dollars needed to bring the system up to a state of good repair, we will essentially end up with a system that was designed for the 1960s and not how people travel today or will in the future.
Wow.
Is he right? You know this person.
Oh, I know exactly who said that.
He's probably expressed that opinion to you.
I'll send a text message after this.
A friend from East Boston?
I'm not going to say anything. I disagree. Here's why. That was taking the current housing situation that we are in. We never talked about housing on the FMCB. Very rarely. Right. I don't think we ever actually talked about housing. So if you take out housing, yes, that's exactly what we would be doing. If you actually build housing in the transit-oriented development opportunities, no, you are building it for this current population, actually our future population. That's the part I disagree with. And I think traditionally we've not talked about housing because we're transportation people. Housing is someone else's problem. But then we realized, oh wait, we'd be able to deliver transportation a lot easier if people lived where we already have it. So I wholly disagree with that if we actually can get the communities to do what they need to do and are required to do under the MBTA Communities Act. But if you aren't willing to go down that road, yeah, then we're absolutely building it for that. In the 1960s, we're really focused on wealthy, white families where, the father worked, the wife stayed at home, and that's not what we want. And I think that's also just not the reality for this generation that is working in this. That's the other thing. The people who are working in these fields, we view things differently. We just do. And the people we're serving, a lot of your constituents, a lot of our constituents want better. They want a better life than what the Commonwealth has traditionally been. So I think arguing that line is the same way of saying, well, we'll never desegregate our schools just because they're in the same locations, these are the same neighborhoods. And I don't want to, over dramatize it, but I do actually think that that's the situation we're talking about. So I 100% disagree.
Okay. I'd like to give the audience a chance now to ask some questions. And if you'd step up to the microphone and please identify yourself. I think we have about 10 minutes left, so.
Hi, Jules from Quincy, one of the more beleaguered parts of the network right now, especially that red line stretch southbound between JFK and North Quincy. That's a doozy. To your point about housing, I could go into the MBTA Communities Act, but let's just go for something a little bit more high level and a little bit more foreign. We see situations in Hong Kong and Japan where the transportation companies there are effectively landlords. They're property developers, management companies, that sort of thing. Value capture is a big opportunity for the T. Where do you think the political will is for that sort of concept to come into play for the T? More so than just TOD, transit-oriented development, as it is already with working with private partners right now.
Yeah. I think the value capture question might be a little easier. I think there will be political will for it when we see the scale of when we see the scale of the need. I think that having that on the table and saying, there's money that we're passing up. There's money that is there's wealth that is being created through the taxpayers, putting money into better transportation, and that isn't being recouped, I think that is an easier conversation to have. I think the T, doing its own developing, I think it's something that should be on the table, but I think we have to make sure that we are that we are, adding ridership as soon as we can, and that we are developing the areas around the T, as soon as possible, as soon as that makes sense. And so in some cases, that's gonna just be the private sector because it needs to move faster. But I think there are ways that we can think about into the future, how the T does get more creative in this. I know there was a bill submitted last year about social housing, which is where the state builds, mixed income housing. So I think that is certainly on the radar. But I think right now, I think the T has a lot on their plate right now, and so I think doing some partnering is probably the thing for the short term. But it makes a lot of sense. And the places that, as you mentioned, the places that have really good transit agency, makes a lot of money from that development.
The big number is $24 billion. That's been bandied about every little bit.
Absolutely. Well, $24 billion is cheap. I think we're looking at significantly more than that.
It's already enough for most people to have their heads.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to that question or issue or?
Legislatively, actually, I'm not sure the T can do that. In the United States, and I think this is actually one of the difficult parts when we talk about international systems, we have a lot more restrictions on what we can legally do, and especially here in the Commonwealth, I don't think the MBTA actually can do it.
You have to think.
Well, aside from whether I can or can't do that, one of the things that we are doing
let us argue this out.
is trying to get out to the various communities that we do serve and have conversations with the local businesses and better understanding what development is on the horizon so we could be at the table in the beginning. A lot of times in the past where I've seen development take place and transportation not to be part of the discussion, we get caught behind trying to figure out how do we serve that when we weren't prepared to. But if we could be at the front of the table in the beginning of the development, then the developer could say, this is what we envision, this is what the T can do today, this is maybe what the T could get to, how do we work together to hit that goal together? And I think that's part of the dialogue going forward. Whether I lead development or not, we are definitely need to be at the table to support development because that's where, again, communication, I think, is the root of success. And or when things don't go as well, it's because we haven't had enough of it. So there's a lot more behind that, but certainly we can facilitate development.
I don't mean to be time hot, but I want to give you some flowers. I spent some time in Flushing. It's a great joy, but there's something about getting on a Port Washington train at Grand Central Madison, and just, you're there. So, thank you.
That is a fantastic facility.
Any other questions? Okay, we have the microphone up there. We'll get it down to you.
Hi. We were talking about this earlier in the lobby. I believe that change comes from the top in large, complex organizations like the T, like transportation. You were out here. We've seen photos of you riding the system. That is all appreciated. What are you doing to ensure that senior management and other people who are in those key decision-making roles are also remaining connected to the day-to-day operations, riders' experiences?
Well, I think one of the reasons I made some changes in senior management is because I wanted not only the institutional knowledge of some of the existing ones, but I wanted to bring in some others that have not only an outside perspective, but folks that are also in and about the system. One of the things that I'm hearing from the operators, from the workforce, is they haven't seen management as much as they're seeing now, riding the system, working the system. During all of these different diversions with the track work, we have senior managers always going out there and making real-time decisions. And that's one of the reasons I think we're seeing the results a little bit different than we've had in the past. Because when we're out there, we're uncovering things that we didn't anticipate that need to be decided right then and there so we don't delay the work. So that's instilling that, that culture in senior management and then pushing it down through the organization, because when they start to see us riding the system and being part of the system, it really is going to be something that is not going to be just an aberration, but it's going to be the norm. And managing incidents, managing day-to-day, we need to be out and about, experience what our riders are doing, experience what our employees are feeling in order to be able to lead and guide them.
We have time for maybe one more question. I know there's some people down here who, I don't know who has the microphone, but.
So thank you very much. Appreciate the comments about equity and housing. One of the places where the T has housing and has some infrastructure, but there appears to be an opportunity for a lot more growth, would be the Fairmont line. You talk to that line and the ability to increase capacity, increase frequency to really serve that area in a way that could really be transformative for Boston.
Well, we are looking at Fairmont and other corridors on how the schedules can better serve the communities. I think one of the things coming up in our spring schedule, folks will see that we're committed to looking at the frequency of our schedules and the ability to be more robust. And that's not just that corridor, but all the corridors that we're looking to serve. Little by little, it's not just the tracks, it's not just the rolling stock and the operators, it's also our signaling systems and eliminating any hindrance to being able to start to provide more service. And there's other infrastructure things that are different corridors that we need to make sure we focus on. And that's having the multiple tracks, the ability to run both directions, and serve, not only, as I said, one direction in the past used to be coming to Boston, but we need reverse travel, and then be able to have station-to-station travel. I think it's not always just the long-distance trips, but the ability to have shorter trips and serve those different communities. But as folks see, we will be focused on the schedules that better serve those communities.
There might be some interesting news coming up soon on the Fairmont line.
Yes,
right?
yes. And I can't get out ahead of it, but we have some good stuff to share.
You can share it if you'd like.
I think it's already on Combis, if people know what that is.
Really, Jared?
It's already out there.
Thanks.
I got one from the Commonwealth meeting.
Anyway, I want to thank everybody, our panelists. I know their time is limited, but I want to thank everybody who is here tonight. There's going to be some opportunity for us to talk out in the atrium, but I think we can all see that those of us, at least who've covered this issue for some time, there's a whole new scene. There's a whole new group of leaders. The kind of caliber that we're hearing tonight is something new for the T. And it's a very exciting time to actually be right here and look ahead to what's going to happen. And I just hope that the legislature is with you with the funds that you need, because I think you're the right people for the job. And we really appreciate what you've done so far. So thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.